On today's video we're going to be doing spring onions. Doing two kinds this year. I'm going to be doing the white shikura and the feast spring onion. So here we are potting out some spring onions. I've actually already done my long shikura spring onions. This is the feast variety of spring onions. You see I've already got some seeds, they just look like little sort of poppy seeds or something. What I do with my spring onions is I plant them in trays. My thinking is you buy them in bunches, so why not grow them in bunches? Some people plant them individually. What I did last year is I used the trays and I probably put about 10 seeds in each tray, and they're sort of clumped in the middle. When they came to be growing, I found if I put them out in the bunch, they were just too tightly packed. So I got some really good ones, but also some spindly ones amongst them. So what I'm going to do this year is probably just try and just put a few less into each pod. Not going to measure it exactly, maybe 5 or 6 in each pod, and then just try and actually just spread them around a little bit. What I'll do is I'll actually tip these into my hand to make it a little bit easier. So I said just probably 5 or 6 per pod. And then the idea with this is by doing it this way, all I'll do is I will just put them out as they're in the pod. So for each of these I'll just put each pod out and plant it as a whole in the ground. So I'm not doing this accurately, just trying to see if I can make it 5 or 6 per. Right, I've actually run out, so I'll need to get a few more. So that's 5 or 6-ish per pod is what I've tried for. Some may have a little bit more, and have just spread them out a little bit. So what I'll do is keep an eye on those, and as I said, what I do is when I come to plant them out, I don't mess around separating them or anything. I'll just take the whole pod out and plant them in one go. So what I'll do with that is I'll just finish by topping it up with some a layer of soil on top of the seeds. Again, what I'm using here is I'm choosing my sort of mix of soil and tea leaves, eggshells and things. Again, I've mentioned on other videos, it doesn't really have much effect really on the seeds growing themselves, but it's just so that when I plant them out, I know that the sort of pod has got those sort of nutrients in it, and as they start to grow in the ground, then they'll start to release those nutrients a little bit more into the ground. So there we go, nothing spectacular, planting them in bunches, and they'll go into one of the trays I've got in the greenhouse. I'll give them a water just as I put them in and see how they're going in a few weeks' time. So here we are, 1 day short of 4 weeks in. Spring onions growing quite nicely, quite spindly, and probably got between 5 and 15 per pot on the go at the moment.
You'll see there that I've got quite a few on the go in the seed trays. This is what they looked like last year before I planted them out. Sorry it's a bit blurred. If you're planting straight outdoors, you can do this from March to about July. It's advised to sow them thinly in rows about 6 inches or 15 centimetres apart, and cover them with about 1.5 centimetres of soil. They should take about 2 to 3 weeks to appear. Mine have taken a little longer this year. If you've sown them thinly, you should not need to thin them out or spread them out. I do grow mine much closer than recommended, as I try to cram so much into my space. Here are a few pics of my first batch last year. They're in the 3 troughs at the front. I'd planted them straight out in bunches, but there were too many in a bunch. I ended up with plenty of good ones, but also some very small ones, as they'd not had enough space to grow. Here's the other ones from my first batch in the front trough. They were also too close. With my second and third batches of spring onions last year, I planted them out in smaller bunches, about 5 in a bunch to give them room, and I also did a trough where I planted them out individually. Here's some pictures I took last year in my veg patch showing some of my harvest. Depending on when you plant your spring onions, you cannot be harvesting them from as early as May right through to October. I normally look to harvest mine when they're about 1 to 2 centimetres wide. I harvest some each week when they're ready, and then at some point in October or November I'll pull up all the rest. I normally give them a good clean and let them dry for a day or two. As I like a supply of spring onions through the year, as we use them in a lot of our meals, I do this by sowing and planting a few batches about 2 to 3 weeks apart. At the end of the year, I also store my excess spring onions in October or November by cutting them up and freezing them. I freeze each chopped spring onion into an ice cube size so they can simply be added straight to a meal. I cover this off a little bit more about how I store my vegetables, so with the spring onions and a few other things, I have a supply right the way through the year. I'm not sure I'll have even finished my spring onions from last year by the time I'm ready to harvest this year's. Anyway, I hope that's helped. I'll update the videos as I go along this year, so remember to check back and see the progress of this year's crop.